You wake up tomorrow to discover that the person you voted for 2 years ago just cast a vote you fundamentally disagree with, such as on healthcare, on education, or on something that directly affects your finances. And there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. You're locked in, stuck, trapped in a decision you made a couple of years ago. You're forced to watch as someone else makes bad decisions for you on issues you care deeply about. Sound familiar? Because that's not imagination. That's government today. Now think about this. What if you could take that vote back? Not in 4 years, not after some scandal breaks or their approval ratings tank. Right now, today. What if democracy itself could move, shift, and respond like water finding its path, flowing around obstacles, adapting to the terrain, filling every crack and crevice where your voice actually matters? This isn't a sci-fi flick, this is called liquid democracy, and it represents the most profound realigning of power since we first decided that kings were a terrible idea. Here's what's truly startling. The 3 branches of government you learned about in civics class, including legislative, executive, and judicial, weren't chiseled into stone tablets, they're just agreements on paper. They're social contracts written by people who lived in a world of horses and letters written with a quill pen. And right now, as we're carrying supercomputers in our pockets and streaming our entire lives through digital networks, we're still conducting government like it's 1789. Part 1. The Architecture of Broken Promises. Let's talk about what's actually happening in your life right now. The legislative branch, Congress, Parliament, whatever your country calls it, is supposed to represent you. That's the whole idea, right? Someone goes to the Capitol, speaks on your behalf, crafts laws that reflect your values and concerns. Except here's the astounding reality. Your representative votes on everything. Climate policy, tax code, military spending, healthcare, education, technology regulation, trade agreements. Think about that for a second. You chose one person to represent your views on literally thousands of complex, specialized issues. Would you hire one doctor to handle your heart surgery, your mental health, your dental work, your podiatry, and do cancer research? Would you trust one mechanic to fix your car, your HVAC system, your laptop, and your plumbing? Of course not, that would be absurd. Yet somehow we've convinced ourselves that electing one representative makes sense in the most important decisions affecting our collective existence. The truth gets darker. In the United States, for instance, the re-election rate for members of Congress hovers around 90% despite approval ratings that frequently dip into the single digits. This is a sickening paradox. It means the system is designed to keep itself alive, regardless of whether it serves the people or poisons them. And most of the time, your representative isn't even voting based on expertise or careful deliberation. They're voting based on party loyalty, donor pressure, or political calculation. And what about those 2,000-page omnibus bills nobody actually reads? Yeah, those become law. Those midnight votes on legislation that affects millions of lives. Standard procedure. The system isn't broken. It was built to function this way. It's built for a small world that no longer exists. And you feel it, don't you? That gnawing sense of powerlessness. You cast your ballot, you did your civic duty, and then, well, nothing. Radio silence. Except when they need your vote again. The research is actually extraordinary here. Political scientists have found that public opinion has a near zero statistical impact on policy outcomes, unless you're in the top economic bracket. Let that sink in. Your voice, your concerns, your lived reality is statistically irrelevant. Part 2. When water replaces walls. This is where liquid democracy becomes genuinely revolutionary. Philosophers like Helene Landmore and proponents of open democracy argue that the biggest flaw in our current system is that it ignores the wisdom of the crowd. Now, forget everything you think you know about how democracy must work. Start from scratch. Start from a simple, almost childlike question. What if you could be specific about who speaks for you and change your mind whenever you needed to? The legislative branch in a liquid democracy becomes something we might call the fluid assembly. Not a building, not a fixed group of politicians with safe seats and seniority rules. It's a living, breathing digital platform where representation moves like water through a maze. Here's how it changes everything about your relationship to power. Instead of one representative taking up 4 years of your life, now you have thousands of specialized proxies available to you. Real people with real expertise. You care about environmental policy. You can delegate that specific vote to an actual climate scientist whose work you respect and whose values align with yours. Economic issues. Maybe you choose a local small business owner who understands the ground level reality of regulation and taxation. Healthcare, perhaps a nurse who's worked in your community hospital for 20 years. The beauty here is that you're not locked into these choices. Their performance drops, values diverge, new information comes to light. You withdraw your delegation instantly. The proxy loses their power not through a drawn-out election cycle or scandal, but through the simple, elegant mechanism of people deciding they're done trusting that voice. Laws themselves undergo metamorphosis. No more omnibus bills, no more bundling veteran healthcare with agricultural subsidies, with defence spending, with immigration policy into one grotesque vote for everything or nothing thousands of pages package. Instead, we have modular lawmaking. This means issue-specific legislation where experts and interested citizens deliberate on single policies. You want to weigh in on renewable energy standards? Great. Don't care about maritime shipping regulations? Then delegate that vote. Your attention becomes as liquid as your political power. Philosophically, liquid democracy is an epistemic breakthrough. It suggests that the truth of a society is better found when we allow cognitive diversity to flow freely. By using issue-specific proxies, we aren't just voting, we are creating a giant distributed brain. This mirrors the ideas of John Dewey, who believed democracy was an experimental process of social inquiry. Liquid democracy turns the legislature into a living lab where the fluidity ensures the most knowledgeable minds are always at the helm of a specific problem. Part 3. The executive reality check. The executive branch has always been about action such as executing laws, running the bureaucracy, making the daily decisions that turn abstract policy into concrete reality. But in traditional democracy, executive power comes with an extraordinary amount of unchecked authority. Presidents, prime ministers and governors, yes, fallible human beings, get broad mandates based on vague campaign promises, and then they have years to do essentially whatever they want. Liquid democracy puts executive power on the shortest leash imaginable. Let's look at project-based mandates. The person running transportation isn't a political appointee who's safe for 4 years regardless of performance. They're someone whose power flows from continuous delegation. Citizens support their work, their decisions, their results. Performance dips? Maybe that new highway project is plagued with cost overruns and corruption. Maybe public transit improvements aren't materialising, the delegation drops, not at the next election. It drops immediately. This is real-time accountability. This becomes even more incredible with liquid budgeting. Right now, your tax dollars disappear into a black hole. You know roughly where they're supposed to go: defence, education, infrastructure, social programmes. But the actual flow is opaque, mysterious, controlled by interests that often have nothing to do with public welfare. In a liquid system, you see exactly where the money flows. And more than seeing, you can influence it. Imagine discovering that a specific military project is wasteful, unnecessary, built more to funnel contracts to donors than to ensure national security. In the current system, you're stuck. You can write to your representative if you want, and good luck with that, but in liquid budgeting, if enough people withdraw their budgetary proxy from that project, the funding freezes, it shifts. Money flows toward priorities that actually reflect collective will rather than backroom deals. The psychological impact of this shift cannot be overstated. Right now, you're a spectator in your own government. You vote occasionally, maybe you protest, maybe you make phone calls that go into some staffer's database, but you're fundamentally powerless between elections. Liquid democracy transforms you from spectator to participant. Your attention, your trust, your delegation of power becomes an ongoing conversation rather than a one-time transaction. Part 4. The guardrails of wisdom. So here's where reasonable people start raising objections, and they should. What about mob rule? What about populist whims that violate fundamental rights? What happens when the liquid surge of public opinion flows towards something genuinely terrible, such as discrimination or scapegoating or the persecution of minorities? Philosophers like Plato would have been terrified of liquid democracy. Plato believed that the unwashed masses were driven by emotion and would inevitably vote for a sweet shop owner over a doctor, the popular over the expert. This is where the judicial branch becomes the anchor, the container, the constitutional guardrail. In liquid democracy, the courts remain relatively solid, and deliberately so. Their job transforms into something both ancient and utterly modern, ensuring that the fluid, fast-moving will of the majority doesn't violate the bedrock principles of human dignity and rights. Think of it like this. The legislative branch is water flowing and adapting. The judicial branch is the riverbed, the banks, the fundamental geography that channels that flow without stopping it. This draws from Kant's idea of a Rechtsstaat, a state based on the rule of law. The judiciary doesn't care about the liquid surge or the viral outrage of the day. It cares about the categorical imperative, which are the universal laws that must never be broken. Philosophers argue that for liquid democracy to work, the judicial branch must be the solid state that keeps the liquid from overflowing into chaos. Sudden populist movements that violate constitutional protections? The courts stop them cold. Not because judges are, for elite gatekeepers, but because we need that stability, that long-term thinking, that defense against our own worst impulses. Even here, though, liquid principles seep in. Jury selection could operate on reputation-based delegation. Instead of random people pulled from voter rolls, imagine juries composed of individuals recognized by their communities for impartiality, wisdom, and careful judgment. People whose reputation for fairness precedes them. It's crowd-sourced wisdom applied to the administration of justice. And as laws become increasingly digital, algorithmic, and embedded in code, the judiciary's role expands into auditing those very systems, ensuring the voting platforms are transparent, hunting for bugs or biases that might disenfranchise citizens. The courts become watchdogs not just of law, but of the technology that enables liquid governance. Part 5. The deep state. In a liquid democracy, the deep state, including agencies like the military, NSA, FBI, and CIA, undergo a profound transformation. They move from being monolithic, opaque centers of power into what philosophers of the digital age call service-oriented mandates. The core change is a shift from permanent authority to performance-based delegation. Here is how these institutions would look through the lens of liquid governance. The military goes from standing army to project-based defense. In a liquid system, the military's blanket budget is replaced by liquid budgeting. Currently, the military receives a massive annual sum with little granular oversight. In a liquid democracy, there would be mission-specific funding. Citizens or their expert proxies, like retired generals or peace activists, could delegate their portion of the defense tax specifically to coastal defense or cybersecurity while withdrawing it from overseas interventions. Then there is the veto of the proxy. If a military operation begins to feel like a heinous violation of the truth, voters can instantly recall the proxies, funding that specific mission, effectively freezing the operation's budget in real time. The intelligence community, NSA, CIA, and FBI, would run on auditable algorithms. The biggest tension in any democracy is between secrecy and truth. Organizations like the NSA and CIA thrive on the darkness that liquid democracy seeks to illuminate. This is where the cryptographic watchdog comes into play. Instead of secretive FISA courts, liquid systems might use zero-knowledge proofs. These are mathematical protocols that allow the CIA to prove they are acting within the law, the anchor of truth, without revealing the sensitive details of an undercover operation. And then there will be algorithmic auditing. The FBI's surveillance tools would no longer be black boxes. In a liquid judicial branch, reputation-based algorithm auditors would have the power to verify that the code running these agencies isn't being used to suppress dissent or manipulate the collective consciousness. In a liquid system, any secretive project would likely have a digital sunset. If the continuous stream of proxy support for a secret project drops below a certain threshold, the project is automatically declassified or defunded. There will be liquid oversight committees. Instead of a few elite politicians in a room, oversight would be handled by a liquid jury of experts who are people with a high reputation for integrity and who are delegated the power to see the secrets on behalf of the public. The existence of these agencies currently causes a deep, dark anxiety, including the feeling that someone is watching you from a shadow you can't see. Liquid democracy turns the lights on. It doesn't necessarily get rid of the spy, but it ensures the spy is working for the meaningful reality of the people, not the self-preservation of the agency. It moves the intelligence community from a state of top-down command to democratic accountability. The loneliness of the citizen disappears when you realize that even the most secretive parts of the state are ultimately powered by the fluid, collective will of your own fingertips. Part 6. The future flowing through you. We're living through the most extraordinary technological transformation in human history. We've built tools that connect billions of people instantly. We've created systems that can process complex information, aggregate preferences, and coordinate action at scales that would have seemed like magic to previous generations. And yet, when it comes to the most fundamental questions of how we govern ourselves, how we make collective decisions, and how we exercise power, we're still using 18th century tools. Does this make sense? Liquid democracy isn't perfect. No system is. It requires digital literacy, protection against manipulation, safeguards against the concentration of proxy power. It demands ongoing engagement rather than passive citizenship. But these are solvable problems. These are technical challenges rather than fundamental contradictions. What liquid democracy offers in return is genuinely breathtaking, the possibility of democracy that actually feels and is, in fact, democratic. It offers power that flows from genuine expertise and trust rather than money and connections. It offers representation that responds to your changing concerns, rather than locking you into choices made in ignorance. It offers a government that works more like a conversation and less like a prison sentence. With liquid democracy, the walls between the governed and government become more permeable. Not erased entirely, as we need some structure, some stability and some protection against chaos, but permeable enough that your voice actually travels to where it's needed. This matters because you matter. Your expertise on your own life, your community and your concerns is not something to be given to an elected representative once every few years. It's something to be activated, channeled, made real through systems that actually reflect your needs at this moment in history. Democracy learned to walk in Athens. It learned to scale with representation. Now it's learning to flow. The question isn't whether this transformation is possible. The technology exists. The theory is sound. The question is whether we have the courage to let go of systems that no longer serve us and embrace something genuinely new. Water always finds its path. Maybe it's time we let it.